right. Welcome. Hello, everyone. My name is Duke. I am now a senior program manager here at Black Men's Exchange, working with the team. And we're happy to be here for our annual health education live streams. I'm going to let the team introduce themselves and we're going to move on into our housekeeping.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sequela Hopper. I'm a member services navigator at Black Men's Exchange and Black Women's Exchange, and I mostly help heterosexual and bisexual women.
Hello, I'm Kashama Sankofa. I am also a health and cultural consultant with Black Men's Exchange National as well.
All right. And just a heads up for people, even though the Quaaludes work is very specific to women in most parts, if you decide to hit up our community number and you do not happen to fit that particular demographic, you can absolutely get service and assistance from us. We have other member service navigators on staff. 410-826-6264 is that number, and we would love to hear from you all. While we're actually waiting for people to come on in, if you happen to know who was on our flyer, there's an image, a hieroglyphic of two young men on our flyer. If you happen to know who they were, feel free to type them in the comments. Real quick, I see people joining on in. Hello, Nashira. Hello, Nduka. Hello, Deshaun. It's really, really great to hear and see from you all. So the last time we were with you, it wasn't actually a direct health education live stream, but we wound up talking about HIV and refusing the package in honor of Black National HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And with that in mind, we had a couple of comments saying hello and welcome and joining in the conversation, getting some new things, as well as the time before that we were talking about the John Henry sickness. And so I'm just going to go over and read a couple of comments from both of those. And so we had Soga Upindo, who had mentioned that the insurrection was white on white crime. We have people coming in and saying good evening, glad to be here. We had some interesting comments over on our other pages, and it says from a Patrick Lee, said, just listening quietly to this conversation has toppled everything I've ever heard or learned by so-called educators. Maxon Lewis mentioned that their father had the John Henry syndrome, but their mother, who was a brilliant woman and recognized what was happening to him, and she pulled him out of that mindset early on strong. And thank you to that mother and woman. I remember them having intense discussions until he was convinced and shown how to move forward. Michael Presley mentioned that the Black community has to seriously deal with colorism in the Black community, and especially in the entertainment industry. And a few more hellos and welcomes and hotaps, and hotep to all of you. Ashe. All right, so for this particular live stream, we have been mentioning that we were going to address this topic at some point, and now is the time. So a few of the live streams in the past, we mentioned how we had to decolonize various different aspects of how we navigate and grow and love each other as a people. I remember some of our guest speakers speaking passionately how we have to decolonize medicine, decolonize our love language, decolonize our education, decolonize so many different things. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was also decolonizing sexuality. And so that is what today's presentation is about. And so we do have a take-home assignment as we try to do our health education live streams going forward. And Adam, if you could roll that. Yes. So for this particular live stream, we are doing a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm getting ready to shut up in a few for Kashama to take it away from there. But if you want to get access to the resource sheet with a full listing of everything that we're going over and some references for you to do your own research, feel free to text our number, 410-626-8626, I believe. I'm sorry, 410-826-6264. My apologies. 6264. Text that number, and we'll give you the full sheet. On it, you'll find references for things such as Boy, Wives, and Female Husbands by Will Roscoe. We'll have information relating to King Hatshepsut, Queen Nzinga, also exactly who was on the hieroglyphics. You'll see those names. We're also talking about, if some of you didn't know, that Shaka Zulu was bisexual, a bisexual figure. And so there's different things and access links for individuals to get to learn about and just really, really take the time to dive deeper in this particular subject matter. But with that in mind, Kashama, take it away.
Okay, y'all. So I'll be presenting a presentation today that I've done at a couple.
I'm sorry, real quick. I see a message from Ian Barrows. Says, wasn't I supposed to get a text informing me about live streams, or was that just for the ones with Dr. Cleo Monago? And I apologize that apparently a message was not sent out or received, and so I'll definitely make note of that going forward. But you should get notifications for all upcoming live streams.
Okay, so without further ado, I will present to you Black Sexuality Unchained, which is a critical analysis of Black sexuality. And in order to do so, we will definitely be looking at history and cultural phenomenon and how it has affected how we see ourselves and each other and navigate issues of gender and sexuality. So if you give me a second, we're going to go ahead and share the screen. Yep. All right, so we have Black Sexuality Unchained, a critical analysis. Now, when we're talking about Black people, we're referring to us as Black. We're referring to people from Africa, whose ancestors do come from Africa. For the purpose of this discussion, we will be talking about those who have descended from what I call the European or transatlantic slave trade, whereas Africans were brought from mostly Central and Western Africa and over into the U.S. as well as various parts of the Western Hemisphere known as colonies. First, let's look at pre-colonial Africa. Now, we understand that Africa is a diverse place, okay? Many different cultures come from Africa and are currently in Africa. But when we talk about Africa, we're also going to address the African cosmos. One thing that is prevalent throughout the continent is a view of the world or a philosophy on life. And we'll get into that while discussing pre-colonial Africa. First, let's discuss views of sex. Now, different cultures, of course, dealt with sexuality, gender in different ways. So we go to West Africa for these examples with the Mboto as well as the Adana. One thing to keep in mind is that the English language and notions of sexuality and how people identify in this context are not necessarily the same as how they were viewed in pre-colonial Africa. In other words, everything does not translate over. Things get lost in translation. However, the Mboto is what people would refer to today as a sex worker or a prostitute. I would prefer to call them an Mboto because that's what they were. These were women who they provided sexual services to men, but they also provided other services as well. They were usually unmarried. They were usually very independent women. The Mboto later evolved into what was known as an Adana. The Adana was also a businesswoman who may or may not, engage in, you would say, sex work, but would also have a restaurant, a hotel, you name it. Now, when we think of pre-colonial Africa, it's important that we do not think of the stereotypes of things being primitive. You have areas like Timbuktu, which were and various advanced civilizations with economies and industries all within themselves. When also we have the Dandalda. Now, the Dandalda is an interesting example because the Dandalda is what people will refer to as transgender today. The Dundalda were individuals who were not considered necessarily male nor female. They were usually biological males. Well, excuse me, I believe they were exclusively biological male. And even today, Dundaldas are used by politicians in some parts of Nigeria to be like the town crier and to bring attention to that politician. They're known for working in various professions. Some of that includes sex work, but they've been negotiators. They've been known as mediators. They've been known to do, plenty of different to fill plenty of different roles within their society. Now, also, it's important to talk about the Dogon people as well as the Dagara people. These were also groups who have a I don't want to say documented, well documented as far as their views of sexuality and gender. There's a concept within those groups known as the gatekeeper, whereas they're not necessarily would have to be a homosexual or someone who is gender fluid. However, those were roles that people who you would call homosexual or gender fluid, many of them operated in the roles of gatekeepers in those societies. However, it was not a requirement. Another thing to take note of when talking about sexuality or sex itself in pre-colonial Africa, sex was definitely a part of everyday life, as much as eating, sleeping, using the restroom, and what have you. And we'll go over later in the presentation how that differs and contrasts with how sex is viewed in today's society. But first, let's take a look at spirituality. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to look at the Yoruba system of the Yoruba people, of course, in present-day Nigeria and some parts of Ghana. We have Imaya.
I want to just add on, because some people don't know, so this section is particular to West Africa, mostly. Which is where a lot of us have come from or taken from. So this is why the relevance to us as quote unquote African Americans.
Yeah, if you want to, go by DNA tests and stuff like that, a lot of people, they say the science isn't reliable, but most Black people or people you would describe as so-called African Americans here, when they get DNA tests, it usually shows around like 40% Yoruba. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, we have Imaya, who is the Orisha, or what would translate into English as a goddess or a deity, the mother of the sea. She also represents motherhood. Now, contrasting her is Olokun, the mysterious father of the ocean's depth. Now, in the Patakis, which are the ancient mythologies or the stories of the Orishas, there are several different Patakis that explain the relationship between Imaya and Olokun in different ways. Sometimes they are referred to as husband and wife. Sometimes they are referred to as brother and sister. And sometimes they are referred to as two parts of the same person. That, of course, meaning they will be, of two genders, if you want to consider that, looking at supernatural deities. Now, you also have fluid gender expression in some Yoruba customs. To the left, you see a sister who is an Ogun priestess. And therefore, you see she is taking on more of a masculine, presentation and being a priestess of Ogun. Ogun is a male Orisha, has a very masculine energy, and we can get into that later when we talk about spirituality and go more in depth into that. On the right, you have a Shango priest. Now, the interesting thing about Shango priests is that there are no Patakis that I know of that describe Shango as being homosexual or bisexual or anything like that. However, Shango priests are referred to as the brides of Shango. And if you look at this brother, he's decked out in what would look like some celebratory bridal garb. And so, when Shango possesses or mounts, a devotee or an initiate, they are said to be the bride of Shango. And usually Shango priests are overwhelmingly male. I've never met a female Shango priest myself. Now, this is another figure from somewhere in Africa, which just, shows you a very, I wouldn't say relaxed attitude, but a very natural and nonchalant attitude towards sexuality, towards our bodies, and towards gender. Now, we'll go to ancient Kemet for a second. Because Kemet depends on who you talk to. Some people would say Kemet is older than the Yoruba civilization. However, I just think it's important to show some diversity on the continent. What we're looking at now is Nia-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep. They are from the 5th dynasty of ancient Kemet. I make a note of saying that always these days, because when I used to talk about Nia-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep, I never mentioned that they were from the 5th dynasty. I started doing that because a friend of mine, one of my fellow Hoteps, as you would call him, we were having a nice little discussion or debate around sexuality in pre-colonial Africa. And he was under the idea that Nia-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep popped up after the Greeks had invaded Kemet or ancient Egypt, and thus bringing their influence of homosexual activity with them, which is not true. These brothers are from the 5th dynasty, and this is well before Greece came on the scene. Now, another thing about Nia-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep is that they are your poster child, or they are the perfect example of how ideas of sexuality and gender in this society, which is, as we know, a white dominated society, are not the same as the way they were in Africa. Nia-Khnum and Khnum-Hotep are depicted in the hieroglyphs as facing each other, and that is a pose that is reserved usually for husband and wife. They were also buried that way. But also, when you enlarge the picture, you will also notice that their wives and children are depicted behind them. So these brothers, they were the royal manicurists and hairdressers or cosmetologists for the Pharaoh's family.
I guess some stereotypes you can't get rid of.
Well, you're not gonna get me in trouble, Duke. But you know, like I say, those brothers had wives and children because when we're talking about the African cosmos again, procreation is very important within the African cosmos, and not for the same reason that it was important in Europe. When we talk about the African cosmos, it is the idea that your ancestors live through you and through your offspring, which is scientifically true because we are genetically made up of our ancestors. So it is seen as a responsibility and a duty to the collective that you procreate and that you keep your bloodline going. Right. So now we get to some interesting stuff. In order to talk about decolonizing our sexuality, we have to get to the bottom of the colonization process. We can't talk about Black sexuality without talking about white or European sexuality or the development of sexuality in Europe, because we are so impacted by Europeans because of our shared history, our forced shared history at that, however, shared nonetheless. So in this portion, we get into the psychosexual history of Europe and its people. We're going from about the Ice Age up until 1500 AD. Typically, Europe is a very barren place, with the exception of these days due to global warming. Right. I'm hearing they're growing like lettuce in Iceland and stuff, Greenland. But Europe has traditionally and historically been a place of a rugged climate. The struggle to survive has been central to Europeans' history from day one. We also learned that they also shared and competed alongside Neanderthals during this time as well. With that being said, procreation was an absolute necessity. It was not this abstract, duty to your collective and keeping the bloodline going. No, this was, we either reproduce or we completely die out. And so therefore, it is my thought, as well as plenty of other scholars, and we'll get into that as well, that is where a lot of the anxieties around sexuality and gender come from. In addition to that, the role of women were very different in the early days of Europe. Because of the physical nature of women, they were seen as weaker as well as a liability. And women, definitely got the rap of being inferior, which, has influenced gender dynamics, I'll say, for I would say ages to come. Now we're going to move forward from the Ice Age because this is our broadcast, and we're going to move into feudalism. Now, during feudalism, it was the time around the 1500s, whereas it preceded the age of exploration, whereas before Europeans got into boats and decided to go and colonize other lands, they were living in Europe and under the system of feudalism, whereas peasants were tied to the land. They were known as serfs, and they were something similar to slaves. However, it wasn't the same system. During that time, we also see a lot of anxieties around sexuality and gender came about. It is also to be noted that women in particular became solidified as property in this particular era of Europe. The owner or the nobleman, the earl or duke, or not you, duke, but the duke or the earl or the baron or whomever was over the land, whomever was granted the land by the king or the monarch, they had the right to rape, I would say rape or sexually assault the newlywed or the new bride of any serf or any peasant on the land at that time, which just gives you an idea of how women were treated. Also, religion. The Catholic Church was the church of Europe up until the Protestant Reformation around, I want to say 1595. Y'all don't quote me on that. However, during this time, we see flagellation, self, abuse coming into play. This is also around the time of the Inquisition. Now, there are several writings and documentations that talk about not only the Inquisition, but the psychosexual tendencies of Europeans at the time, particularly around the Catholic tradition. It was noted that a priest during the 15th century in Spain, he was known to seek self-gratification or sexual gratification by whipping himself and covering his wounds with vinegar. So there's a lot of things going on there that was not happening in Africa, and it's because of the two different developments, the two different environments in which the psychosexual evolution of the people took place. However, once Europeans began to colonize other lands, this marked an era in history where they were able to inflict and express any and all sexual, desires or tendencies onto a group of people who had no power to resist it. And those people were us. Okay, so that's why we go through the psychosexual history of Europe, in order to understand what we went through and why we were going through it. It's not enough to just go ahead, dude. What you were about to say or ask?
So what I find interesting is I remember growing up and hearing that homosexuality is un-African, right? But going through this presentation and really understanding like the psychosexual history of Europe and where we come from as a people ourselves, it seems that what really is un-African is homophobia, quote unquote, is this idea of violence and abuse, like the brigade that brought in this heavy censoring and control relationship around bodies and how they interact with other individuals is a European regime.
Well, I'll go further than that, Duke, to say that homosexuality, the word and the concept, is distinctly un-African,
right?
Simply because sexual behavior was not used as like an identifier. It was not pathologized. You weren't a sexual or a certain type of sexual. Right. You engaged in your own unique expression of sexuality. And there were also certain duties or norms or requirements within your society that you may or may not have been expected to fulfill, depending on your society. You may have been in the Dogon and they may have had a special place for you. You may have been in Kemet and it may have been, hey, be the best person you can be, but make sure you pass on the bloodline, that type of stuff. So I'm with you on that. I just want to make sure that we emphasize language and emphasize the concepts, conceptualization or context, as I would say. So really, let's move back to pre-colonial Africa, because it's not even just around sexual or homosexuality. Even when it came to marriage, as for instance, Igbo women, there was not a strong emphasis in pre-colonial among the pre-colonial Igbo people on virginity or abstinence before marriage. Igbo women and men were expected to have sexual partners, to their delight, and being responsible, of course, up until marriage. So, and in addition to that, you had also some societies as in Benin, whereas sometimes relationships between men was a common practice, and it was accepted and looked upon as something of a youthful thing. Whereas once they got married or got older, they were expected to, I guess, let it go. But then it was also known to carry on over into old age sometimes. So that should definitely be understood. And that gets us to the colonization of Black sex. Okay. So we talked about how, we talked about the different sexual tendencies and activities that were going on in Europe. And now we come to a place to where, Europeans have complete and utter control over African bodies. And you have people like this who popped up. Now, this is Kathy Bates, mind you. But in this photograph, she is portraying, I don't call her madam.
Marie.
Lalaurie, actually, is her name. Delphine Lalaurie, who was a New Orleans slaveholder. And she was also a serial killer and a serial torturer and masochist. The character, Delphine Lalaurie, became well known through the American Horror Story series, where some of her
Coven season 3.
Thank you, dude. Where some of her horrendous acts were actually, depicted in that show, and they were based on truth. So we also, now what happened was also during all of this abuse, because you had massive torture, rape, brainwashing, all types of things that were happening. And there were these images or these archetypes that were placed on the Black people to categorize us and to psychologically put us into a box to where we could be more easily abused by Europeans. And we're going to go through some of these archetypes that still affect how we view sexuality, gender, as well as ourselves today. One is very common, the mammy, right? And we're going to actually talk about some of that in the next BMX broadcast. But the mammy was stereotypically dark, even though she didn't have to be, overweight most of the time, asexual. Typically, you did not see mammy with a husband or any type of love interest. She was typically domineering over Black men and protective over white people. The mammy portrayed by Sister Hattie McDaniels here in the photograph in Gone with the Wind was she won that Academy Award because she embodied everything that mammy was supposed to be according to the stereotype. There was even a scene where she was clearing a path for the white woman, and she had an umbrella or something. She's knocking Black men out the way, saying, "Move on out the way now, move on out the way now. You see, like you see Miss Scarlet coming through." That was that stereotype. We also have the Jezebel. She was sassy, oversexed, voluptuous, big booty. You could also call her the Sapphire. And this image or stereotype was particularly useful to white women because these women, the narrative were that these women were the seductress of upstanding Christian white men, and that their white slave-holding husbands would be chaste and faithful and would not be, having all of these children, running around from slave women if only these oversexed Black women did not, throw themselves at them. Of course, this wasn't true. Of course, slave-holding wives, they knew this wasn't true. This was just simply a way of justifying the victimizing of Black women, as well as a way to remove themselves from being complicit and being beneficiaries of it.
Now, I don't have any proof or history of this, but I think it's interesting. I remember growing up that the term "she seduced me" was very, very common. and used as a legal defense quite often when I was younger. Now you don't hear that so much anymore because it's like
correct.
people have an understanding that seduction is not a quote unquote crime. Like you can say no, like that's a real thing. But yeah.
Now you also have the buck, and this has followed Black men for a long time, and it has done great harm to us. He's aggressive, he's oversexed, he's muscular, he's unfeeling, and he's animalistic. And most of the so-called rape narratives around Black men seeking out white women were around this type of stereotype. What you're looking at now is a vintage erotica novel from the 1960s, and it's called Slave Horrors, Her Big Black Buck. Just so you know, this stuff was not marketed towards Black people. And even today, most of the porn that exists that, goes into that as far as slave play, race play, degrading Black people for the sake of degrading Black people in sex scenes, that's not marketed towards Black people.
Called Thug Hunter and Blacks on Boys and Noir Male, even. Those are not marketed to Black people.
Right. And it's also, they do it with women too. There's a site called Ghetto Gaggers where Black women are degraded. So now this gets us into Black bodies. It is very important for us to understand that the fact that our bodies have not been ours, if the fact that the narratives around our bodies have not even been ours, has greatly affected our views and how we navigate sexuality, how we navigate each other sexually. It's important to look at certain things like stetopygia. Stetopygia, you'll find this in your source sheet, was supposedly a scientific term used to describe the buttocks of African women, particularly the, I believe it's the Khoisan women of Southern Africa. I believe this is a photo that depicts a Khoisan woman. Actually, this may be Sarji Bharti herself, but Sarji Bharti was one of the most famous Black women to ever be, well, probably the first Black woman to ever be massively exploited for her butt, right? The way you see Nicki Minaj and other people, I wouldn't say they're exploited, a big emphasis placed on their butt, their derriere, as if that is actually one of their assets. She is one of the first and well-known Black women to be exploited in this fashion. She was taken from Africa, of course, into France, and she was put on exhibition as if she was in a zoo. She was poked and prodded and made fun of by Europeans. And once her novelty wore off, or people, got tired of paying dime or whatever to go and see the sideshow, she was then relegated to a life of prostitution in the streets of Paris. And she died destitute and poor. We see this following Black women today. And I can't tell you how many times I see a sister take a picture and the first thing she does is turn around. And this is not me judging. This is not me saying anything that is positive, negative, whether I condone it or not. I'm just giving you some historical context and some cultural context so that we can analyze our behavior and analyze how we view ourselves and each other sexually. Now,
and I think we have proof of this now, because I want to get into it. Like, I mean, we've always had proof, but even from more contemporary women's mouths, if anyone's listened to Hotels by Jasmine Sullivan, which is an amazing CD I love and play over and over again, but some of the stories that were presented on there were women talking about how they did not see that they had any value beyond the idea of making a man climax. And like, this is their own admission in wordings. And so they talk about how they only view themselves based on how pretty they, quote unquote, are in this particular society. And so there's a lot of different things that we have to navigate through when it comes to this Eurocentric currency of racism and prejudiceness and beauty status and blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely. De-Colonizing, how you doing over there, sis? You anything popping in your mind? Any questions?
I'm taking notes. This is
okay.
for real. Like,
All right. Well, we'll surely have some time to discuss and unpack some things.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so now we've talked about our sisters and the history of the exploitation that took place with them. Now, on the contrast, whereas white men took liberties with black women, on the other way around, if a black man dreamed or even imagined having sex with a white woman, or or any type of even physical contact with a white woman, that would lead typically to his painful, slow death via lynching, more commonly. Another thing that happened to black men, particularly during the colonization of black sex, was buck breaking. Now, the term buck breaking has become quite popular, and there's also a documentary that's going to be coming out by my brother Tariq Nasheed, and I'm going to watch it because I'm very much interested in to see how he covers this topic. But I will say this: it is commonly believed that white slaveholders publicly raped and sexually assaulted black men in front of their wives, their children, and in front of the whole plantation in order to break them. Now, what I will say to this is pure fact, is that there's no documentation of that happening. There's no, and when I say documentation, I'm not just talking about what white folks say. I mean, there are no actual narratives from enslaved people saying that happened. However, buck breaking was an actual thing, and it was done publicly. And there is a sexual element to it, because what this image you see right now was the typical fashion in which buck breaking occurred. A black man was stripped. He was placed on his stomach, buttocks in the air, and he was beaten. And it was the emphasis was on making sure that the enslaved community and his wives and children, or his wife and children, witnessed it. And it was done typically with the strongest, most rebellious male slave, okay, or enslaved black male, I should say. Now, in terms of the sexual assault of black men, that is documented. You can find some slave narratives about this. I believe Harriet Jacobs, in her autobiography, makes some reference to it as well. The thing to understand also is that Europeans come from a quite anti-homosexual society, and a sexually anxious, or a society that's wrought with sexual anxiety because of the history that we've discussed before. Sodomy laws were quite strict in Europe, and they carried over into the colonies. To this day, African countries that were former colonies of Europe, as well as Caribbean countries that were former colonies of Europe, kept sodomy laws on the books, and it came from their colonization periods. It did not happen before colonization in regards to anti-sodomy laws, or laws against male on male sexual activity, or what they even called buggery.
We have, because of the nature of this presentation, we haven't been reading a lot of the comments, but I do want to, there is a contention point. So Lowell B. Denny said, "Not true, brother. Check out Tommy Curry's work. There's evidence of white slave owners and their white wives sexually assaulting black boys and men."
Okay.
Even Dr. Monago joined in speaking not true. I wanted to add.
So, wait. What I said as far as the buck breaking, I said this was not the rape. Public rape in the buck breaking is not a documented process. I said there is documentation, however, of black men being sexually assaulted during slavery. So let's make sure that I'm clear on that.
I want to help clarify something too. Another thing that is missing from the conversation often is that buck breaking, described as a public act in front of everyone,
right,
is oftentimes misconstrued in just a huge lie. Buck breaking, any type of sexual assault that was towards men by white slave owners, was held secretly in private. This was not something that they could get away with even amongst their own social circles, because homosexuality was and still is and always was frowned upon even in their society. And so the idea of it being public execution is contested based on history.
Right. And there are also documentation of actual slaveholders being punished and convicted because it was found out that they were sexually assaulting male enslaved black men. It
absolutely happened, but not this public account. Yeah.
And when I say it's documented, particularly in Brazil, you can find documentation of several slaveholders being punished by the government there because it came out that they were committing sodomy against their enslaved males. So yeah, it absolutely happened. It just was not a public spectacle, and we have to understand that the only reason why it wasn't part of the public spectacle of the beating and the breaking is because of those strict laws against homosexuality and so-called anti-sodomy.
Last thing, and then we can move on. I forget the name of it. If Cleo could type in the comments, and maybe you know, Kashama, but part of the buck breaking process, which was just to control a black male and kill them in order to scare others into submission, one of the things they would do is they would tie them to horses, and they would, and then hit the horses for them to run apart, and they were literally torn apart. But there was a word that described this phenomenon.
Drawn and quartered.
Brawn and quartered.
No, drawn and quartered is what it's called. And understand that this process it wasn't just about breaking the male, because this was a psychological process for the whole enslaved community to view this happening. So, you know, we got to understand that this was also something that was used to break an individual, but it's also used to break the morale of the group. Now, we're still on black bodies, okay? And also, now we talked about steatopygia, but we have to also talk about the idea of penis envy, or the idea of black men and the stereotype of having larger than normal genitalia. Right now, I'm going to let Dr. Frances Cress Welsing articulate some of this stuff, as well as, she's going to articulate genetic annihilation, but a lot of this stuff ties into the stereotypes about black men and the sexuality and the fears and anxiety that arose from Europeans. And this, of course, is a theory of Dr. Welsing. And anybody that knows and respects Dr. Welsing, you know that she was an absolute scientist, and she wanted us to keep searching and seeking truth and to constantly question and challenge. So these days, we're going to talk about like the evolution of things in regards to interracial mixing and stuff like that. But this is coming from Dr. Welsing explains this from a very primitive, early assessment of white power and its motivation.
White people, even though most white people are not consciously understanding their problem in genetics, they are certainly aware that they are genetically dominated by people of color. That's why it was a statement, one drop of black blood makes you black, because people of color have the genetic capacity to annihilate white people. And so unless white people control the reproductivity of people of color, then we can postulate that perhaps one day there won't be any white people. And I think that the very survival of white people necessitates that they project genetic inferiority on people of color, because it is they who really are aware that they are genetic recessive and perhaps genetically inferior to people of color. And I am not saying this to call the condition of skin whiteness to say, well, no, white people are inferior. I'm not saying it for that purpose, but I think that
just a brief clip of her speaking. Please go back and look at some more of Dr. Welsing, because she gets a lot into the psychological motivation behind a lot of white power and a lot of white anxieties in over black men. And you can see
housekeeping things.
Oh, go ahead, dude, please.
I just wanted to mention that as we continue, please join us on YouTube if you can. It'd be really, really great in order to help draw our numbers and make sure that we can keep this show going. But two, I would be super interested in, if you're interested in the comment sections, please let us know. It'd be great, I think, if we do a watch party of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing Theory of the Black Planet and discuss that live at some point on a different session. If you're a fan of that, let us know, and we can put that into our programming. Kashama?
Yeah, we were supposed to do something around Dr. Welsing too, dude. Me and you and I.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, but yeah,
I know. It was back when it was just us. We got to figure out a way to include the Quayla in that. But that's the section on black bodies for us to understand that part. All right. Now we're going to get into another key component in decolonizing, a key component in the colonization of black sexuality. So we must take this and unpack it when it comes to decolonizing our sexuality, and that is religion. Y'all see, I got I got my girl up there, Kim Burrell. I love her voice. But so with that being said, Christianity has been the predominant religion of Black people on this side of the planet, and it is actually the largest growing religion on the continent, I believe, at this point. And it has, of course, played a major role in how we view sexuality. But I want to go into the case of the continent and homosexuality.
Who does go? This Casper.
This individual is named Scott Lively. He is called an anti-gay activist. He's a right-wing Christian, evangelical, conservative, whatever. All those different ways of describing a white nationalist, right? Or, but him, along with a contingent of white evangelicals, they took money over to the continent, to Uganda, places like Nigeria, and they put money in the hands of pastors and politicians to push their ideology. Now, first of all, understand that they had been defeated by their white counterparts. The LGBT rainbow crew over here in the US, you know how they don't play? Right. They weren't playing with Scott Lively. Scott Lively had to go over to the continent and to the Caribbean, which is typical because when people want to exploit, when people want to further an agenda, they know they can do it on the continent. They know they can do it on the Caribbean, in many parts of the Caribbean, because of the history of oppression and the stigmas that we're dealing with over there, especially economic oppression. You get locked down in a poor place. But go ahead, dude.
I wanted to add because a lot of people, this story just came and went, but stories about homosexuals disappearing in, what was it, Russia, I believe? Homosexuals disappearing in concentration camps in Russia, and when you asked the authorities about it, said we don't know what you're talking about because there's no homosexuals here.
No, the president said that, dude. The president said
I'm laughing now, but to be honest, y'all, the issue there was legit murder and kidnapping and things that were going on in that particular country around issues of people who display diverse sexual behaviors. But when pressured about it and trying to figure out what happened, Scott Lively was behind that epidemic as well.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Yes, he was behind that. Mm-hmm.
And that crew also, there's been a white nationalist Trump element that has merged with that religious contingent over there in Russia, Eastern Europe. But they were forcing homosexuals to jump out of 12, 20-story buildings, man, over there. They were savage over there in Russia to those to those gay identified people. But what you're looking at now is Pastor Simpa. And the only reason I'm saying Pastor Simpa because I can't remember his first name. He's a puppet. He's one of Scott Lively's puppets over there on the continent. You all may have seen him on a popular video where he was saying that homosexuals eat the poo-poo.
It may not be. I mean, it's been so long. I don't know if people remember it now, but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have time to play it. I used to play it when I do this presentation live. But so now that gets us to Black sexuality in the modern world, okay? And who better to represent Black sexuality right now, I think, than Beyonce.
I'll cut my camera off.
Now, so when we talk about the modern world, we're moving from 1920s, early part of the 20th century, on into the present day. You see a scene of a jazz club here because when the jazz scene came, Black people migrated from the South into the cities of the North, as well as some whites migrated from the South and the Midwest in search of jobs and economic prosperity. In these larger cities, there was a certain amount of mixing that started happening amongst white and Black people, particularly in the social scene or the jazz scene. And it was mostly white people going to Black, establishments or whatever on safaris. But during this time, that's when a certain different dynamic started to rise up, particularly because of the economic oppression that was happening in the larger cities of the North. You had this prostitution element or the phenomenon of the Black pimp and the white prostitute, as well as Black prostitutes and white johns or white clients. This thing happened, And you can see it in a lot of the black exploitation films where they portray pimps and what have you. And usually they have, white women on their arm, along with, other races of women too. But this is when this stuff started to come about, and it was unheard of in the South and before then. It's also interesting to note too that during this time, a lot of your drug laws came into to existence during the 1930s. Particularly, marijuana was made illegal, in addition to cocaine was made illegal, and not because it was bad for your health. They didn't know that. The government made it illegal because of the narrative that was promoted, that black men in particular would get high, and because they were already brutes and oversexed, that they will immediately go and try to have sex or would assault a white woman. And in some places like Texas and closer to the Mexican border, that narrative was promoted about Mexican men as well. But it was primarily, what you see is the fear were that black men. Also that young white teens would get hooked on this stuff like reefer madness, whereas white teenagers would get into black music and black culture and get hooked on drugs and go crazy. In the early days of
You had a
rock and
question.
roll. Sure. Who's that?
Something about, I can't is that Al Sharpton? Yeah, is that Al Sharpton? Someone that asked.
That's Duke Ellington. You funny, whoever that is. Al is not even that old. Al Sharpton's not that old. We think of him as being quite old, but he's not. What was I before somebody started clowning? Then the early days of what we call rock and roll, I'll say, it was referred to as race music. And it was forbidden on most airwaves or most mainstream radio stations because it was seen as being too sexual. Hey, I don't know. The anxieties of white people around sexuality, I don't know. I can't make sense of it, but the early rock and roll or that R&B music that was coming out in the late 40s and early 50s, it was seen as being too raunchy and sexual, and that it would encourage immorality, and it was particularly associated with black musicians and referred to as race music. Now,
Aaron, in the comments, I see that you sighed. If you could illuminate that for us, let us know what you're sighing about, Kashama.
Well, no, I was just going to go back into saying that the same anxieties around sexuality continue to plague black men, causing us to become the victims of lynchings and the anxiety around us black men assaulting white women. This was still happening well up until present day. So that's why we talk about these things, because it follows us. Now, this gets us into the 60s and 70s, whereas there was the so-called sexual revolution. People of sexual and gender minorities, who you would call gay or lesbian or same gender loving in the case of black people, as well as women, started to become critical and started to analyze, their roles and how they are, how they can navigate society, how they're treated in society. This, bled over into our communities as well, because we as black people started to look. We weren't living in a bubble, people. We were living in this country, we were watching television, watching movies. We started to look at things too and started to say, hey, well, what is the role of a woman? What does it mean to be a homosexual? That's when the gay identity became known, more so within white circles. And it was later, gay and lesbian was later adopted by black people around the 80s and 90s. But even so in the 90s, you didn't hear a lot of black people calling themselves gay and lesbian. You heard a lot of black people still using phrases that were like colloquialisms, in the family, in the life, things like that. What you're looking at, children. or something like that. Yeah. Now, what you're looking at is a poster from the movie Norman, Is That You? With Brother Red Fox, who's a comedy legend, icon. And it says there's a sexual revolution going on and all the leaders are in my family, right? And the main storyline in this movie is that the son is homosexual, Norman. Y'all should go and watch that movie because it is interesting. Now, this is just to give you a little glimpse of some of the things that happened, from 1970s on up to, up until like 1990, I would say. To the left, you see the rainbow flag as well as the pink triangle. White homosexuals and what we call lesbians today, gay and lesbians, they adopted these symbols and this iconography to culturally affirm themselves because they were in a resistance or a fight against their government, against their heterosexual counterparts, really. And they pulled on the rainbow flag, which the man to the bottom right, Harry Hay, is often given credit for the concept of the rainbow flag. No, excuse me, Gilbert something is given credit for the rainbow flag, but also understand that Reverend Jesse Jackson was also using rainbow as like a symbology for the whole idea of a rainbow coalition.
Not just also, but he did it first.
Well, yeah, I believe he did it first. However,
based on
they'll dispute it.
He did it first, yeah.
Again, like I said, they'll dispute it. And yeah, so, but it's interesting to note that even before he did it, I was just watching Black Messiah and Judas the other night, right? And I heard Chairman Fred Hampton say in the movie, "I'm going to start a rainbow coalition," right? This concept was, circulating, coming out of the Black Power movement before it was ever used or adopted by by white gay and lesbians. Mm-hmm. The pink triangle, I just explained that, and to the top middle, you see actual Holocaust victims who were homosexual being brought into a concentration camp with the pink triangle on their uniforms. Now, to the right, top right, is Brother Marion Barry, who was the mayor of DC, and is actually known as being the greatest mayor of all time. But the reason I have him on there is because he actually started the Pride celebration in DC. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he started the Pride celebration in DC. However, the Pride was appropriated by the white LGBT.
Oh, right, because Black and I'm proud and proud moments. Yeah.
Right. Black and I'm proud, Black Pride. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So, and now at the bottom center, you see Gloria Steinem, who was a leading figure in the feminist movement during the 70s. And you see Sister, I forget that sister's name, Hughes, Sister Dorothy Hughes, Dorothy Pitts Hughes, I believe. And this just goes to show you how the feminist movement, sought to consolidate Black women in seeking power. And
what I found out?
What was that?
Something I found out separate to this but related is that Harriet Tubman was a part of women's suffrage movement. She knew and was acquainted with Susan B. Anthony.
She was acquainted with Susan B. Anthony. They try to claim her as part of the women's suffrage movement. But I don't, honestly, I haven't seen really anything to back that up. All I know is there were some acquaintance with her, and I believe she was, she was noted for being a woman, but this isn't new. And so I'm bringing this to our attention so that we understand that in order to decolonize our sexuality, we have to first understand that our gender and sexuality has to first be ours. And we can't let it get caught up in white political agendas. Whether you agree or think those agendas are nefarious or not. I'm not going to sit here and say that white homosexuals didn't have a right to act up against Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan was a blatant, anti-homosexual and among plenty of other horrible things, anti-Black racist as well. But I'm not going to sit here and say they shouldn't have had no qualms with that. No, but that was their fight. So we have to understand that when they are politicizing their sexuality and their gender, when I say they, I am talking about, white people, those who are, of European descent. It's because they are already consolidated under the political narrative of whiteness.
Before you move to the next slide, I want to let people know we are coming up on towards the end of this presentation as well as
Yeah.
time, but we do have a few more things to discuss with you all. And so what I'm going to say is that we are making space for, if you want to join in and discuss with us, just 2 people. We only have time for 2 people this evening. I'm sorry. 2 people. Adam is going to post that link soon. So when he posts that link, unfortunately, it is a race. But we would love to hear from you all. And if you have a question or comment about what's going on.
And we only got about 3 slides left. And I'm going to get through this rather expeditiously. Now, right here, we just show showing multiple agendas and using sex and sexuality and how it's being used to sell things. And how Black people are being brought into it, being, pulled into it. Up the top, you see the interracial couple. The bottom, you see the Doritos commercial where this white guy pretty much appears to be like sexually harassing or assaulting his brother. And then you have this woman doing something to a burger that we can't make sense of. We also have King Kong. A lot of people don't know that King Kong was based off of Jack Johnson, who was a great heavyweight boxer back in the day, who was also known to sleep with white women. Now, there's no accident that Vogue decided to do this cover a couple years back with LeBron James. We also continue to see relationships between Black men and Black women in particular, or Black love relationships, often portrayed as being strained and traumatic and dysfunctional. And we also continue to see the sexualization of Black women.
Mm-hmm. Or the pursuit of relationships with white people is somehow holy and free of pain and trauma and all that other stuff.
Right. So there we have it.
Yeah.
Wow. That got heavy for a second. But when you brought up religion, I thought about how white people take the Bible and they just change it and put whatever they want to put in it. And it made me remember, I read somewhere that, I'm not sure what Bible quote it is, but where it talks about homosexuality. It's like man should not be with
lie
man.
with man as I lie with
They
woman.
changed man from boy. And so you see how they pervert things to fit their agendas.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do with everything else.
I'm like a huge anti-Bible thumper, but there is a theologists and people who study the Bible. They also go in depth to talk about how allegedly, according to them in their research, homosexuality is not even really mentioned at all. Right. Throughout their particular testaments. The story has been changed over and over again as far as exactly what was being referenced as the quote-unquote abomination. My mentor, who's also in the comments, he always has a funny comeback as far as man should not lie with man as they lie with a woman. And Cleo was always respond, well, more importantly, no one's trying to, because no one's crazy. Like we lie with man the way that we would lie with a man, not lie with them the way that you would lie with a woman, because it is different. So it's
I just want to say, Bongani, you're gonna be putting you on chat probation. That's all.
We need monitors, and we need monitors.
Bongani, he knows it's all. I'm just having fun with him though, because he likes to make us laugh.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to read some of these comments real quick, and then we're going to go into, if no one joins the link, if you do not want to talk with us, we understand. But the link is there if you would like to join with us. Holmes had mentioned that I talked decolonizing Black sexuality, and I'm met with crazy amounts of resistance from other Black folks who are proudly steeped in white sexuality, gender discourse. Almost always need to be creative. That's the key part. It is about being creatives in order to discuss this topic.
Induka wants to come on.
Induka? Okay.
Induka Uhiere Ebite says, "Can I speak?"
Well, if you click the link, the link has been posted in the comment sections on all the different peripherals. Hey, John.
Hello, John. What's on your mind, brother? How are you, first of all? You're muted.
You're muted.
I think I have to leave. It's too. I did something wrong. Oh, you know what I did? Hold on.
You good? We hear you.
We can hear and see you, John.
But I heard about 3 or 4 different streams going on. But what it was, I ended up on YouTube, so then I had to turn the YouTube off. I figured it out very quick. So good evening. It's good to see you all again. This is a very impactful topic, especially now. Things are going crazy, people doing things they shouldn't be doing, and it's going to get even more intense in the next few months when things start opening up again. So I think that this is very appropriate to really give people a moment, an opportunity to think about their actions as they move forward and be more smart and aware of how their actions are being, I'll just say, manipulated for a particular result. And as you go back into a sense of success or normalcy, so to say, that you make different choices. So hopefully this type of conversation allows folks to make better decisions for themselves and ultimately their community going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Up here, trying to figure out what's going on with Indica.
I wanted to add to Holmes's comment and just say that we have been stuck in a white narrative around sexuality and gender for centuries. Mainly, and I mean, of course, you watched the presentation, but because our sexuality and our gender and our bodies have not been ours for so long, we have developed, a pathology of being and of navigating sexuality and gender that was created in order to navigate being colonized, being enslaved, being under control, being dominated. Whereas now we are going to have to unpack sexuality and figure out how to navigate this as a people in a free world, as a free people. And that's not easy. And none about. A lot of people think they have the answer, and I'm gonna tell you, you haven't slept with enough people to have the answer. And what do I mean by that? Sexuality is very unique and individualized. Yeah. However, we are not individualistic people. We are a very collective people. That is part of the African cosmos. So we're going to have to understand, like our ancestors and many of those societies in pre-colonial times came to understanding that while sexuality is unique, it still has a purpose that serves us as a collective.
Part of what is necessary to have this conversation, and even as far as decolonizing sexuality, is decolonizing the language. And so I know going forward, a big project that we're going to do is on language relativity, which is the study of how the language you speak controls how you think and how you perceive the world. And that is a big deal for us as African Americans being colonized in this context, because we're always looking for the relation or how to perceive or define things through a Eurocentric lens when it comes to places and countries and cities that did not have the exact same level of colonization we had, so they operate in a more free sense, in a way that is not as boxed in as America is. And so it's important to have that conversation. I know that
I was going to say you should definitely go back to Dr. Wilson when you do that presentation too.
Absolutely. And thank you, Adam. I was actually headed towards there now. So for individuals following along, again, if you would like a resource list for what's going on, please text our number 410-826-6264. Join our community. You can get updates on live streams. You can talk with us. You can put in requests. You can have suggestions. You can co-host with us even if you happen to have a topic and we, vet you and go through the facilitation process. In addition to that, we, as mentioned before, we have programs coming up, actual programs and things that you all can engage in beyond just our live streams. And so Adam's getting ready to show a reel for us, but just giving you an idea of what's going on. De-Colonizing is going to explain two of the programs. I know one of them is a yoga program with a yogi by the name of Eddie. Ed the Yogi. That happens on Sundays at 12 p.m. noon. The first one will be this Sunday. You can just log into a Zoom and get your guidance and meditation on. I'm pretty sure Kashama will be there. So that should be fun. It is. Oh, yes. Everything that we're presenting is free, by the way. Next, Daquila, if you could go over your two programs.
Will do. So Black Women's Exchange is rolling out some awesome new programs. This past Wednesday, I hosted a virtual vision board party webisode for the first installment of Eyes on the Prize. If you're in Baltimore, you can still pick up some vision board materials in preparation for our second session, Inward Healing to Outward Abundance, on March 17th. And then we're also rolling out a menstruation celebration sister circle to start on March 9th. We'll learn to embrace our cycles by tuning into ourselves. This will be every second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
And
Dude, you did emphasize that was comedic yoga, right?
I did not. So go ahead and
That is
explain that.
comedic yoga we're doing, y'all. My bad.
What, tell them a little bit about what the difference is. Make them excited.
Well, it comes from ancient Kemet, and Ed the yogi is going to be better at breaking that down than I am because he's in.
And Kemet is Egypt for y'all people that didn't know the uncolonized name. So with that being said, we're going to leave you with three more documents actually. One is we have a campaign, as always, titled "Black Men Have Options." This is our push and effort in order to deal with various different sexual health issues in our community, and let them know about their different options and make sure that people are safe. There's ways to live a lifestyle that is safe, fun, pleasant, while also not contracting HIV. And so that information is out there, and we have that for the community. Back to language relativity. Part of that is I do a workshop. I know it happened last year before we started our new run on symbolism. And one of the things that's important to make sure people know is that if you happen to identify as same gender loving or same sex attracted, and you're looking for ways outside of the LGBTQ paradigm, that language has been created and it's been out there for some time. One of those is SGL, again, same gender loving. And with that, there's a symbol, not the rainbow. It is actually titled the Bible BC. Adam, if you could show that. So this particular symbol here is inspired by Ndinkra and Ndinkra text and Nsibidi script using Pan-African colors. The idea is that it is two same or similar faces facing each other, and within that being a whole circle. So there's wholeness despite duality. And when you see the concept of dots in ancient African languages and texts, it is the idea of gender, is the notion of gender. And so in this particular instance is to represent that sometimes gender changes. And so that is a particular reference point for same gender loving and people of gender variance is how we put it. Again, if you're looking for more information on the things described today or presented today, text that number. You can get a resource list. And lastly, we have our next topic. So I'm getting ready to sign out, but as we do our closing assignments, you will get a flash of what our next presentation is. So this has been Duke. Thank you so much, Kashama, for this presentation.
Welcome,
I've watched it so many times before, and every time it's just amazing and awesome. Thank you for the effort put in, and can't wait to talk to you all next time.
Yes, thank you, Kashama, so much. I learned a lot, and I'm really interested in going through this resource list because it's a lot on there. My name is De-Colonizing Hopper, everybody, Member Services Navigator at Black Men's Exchange and Black Women's Exchange.
Yes. Again, if you want navigation services, it's the same thing. We try to keep it simple. Join our community, 410-826-6264, and then we will handle that information privately, securely, and HIPAA compliantly. Kashama?
It's been a pleasure, delivering this information to you all, and I hope that you do go in and dig in because there's so much. I only scratched the surface, and that's why that source sheet is so full. Because some of it would be book titles and articles, but a lot of it are just terms, keywords, and terms for you to Google and just go down those rabbit holes.
All righty. Well, again, thank you all for tuning in. If you are liking our live streams, please let people know about it. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and stay tuned for our very next session.
Peace, everybody.